G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. I suppose, unless you're living under a rock, you've heard that the people of Gaza have decided to launch an all-out surprise attack against the state, the nation and the citizens of Israel. There are people who are surprised by this. There are people who didn't see it coming. I'm not one of those people. There are people who were not really taking it seriously, that Benjamin Netanyahu has deliberately contrived in order to safeguard his own position despite being indicted for corruption, has formed political alliances with some really questionably shady theological minorities on the very outside edge of Judaism. And to please those people, he has attempted to introduce legislation effectively gutting the Israeli Supreme Court's ability to declare a bill, a law, to be unconstitutional, or whatever the technically correct term is in Israel, because I don't know whether Israel's actually got a constitution. Um, it's a strange case as countries go. In the ancientness of the history, people in the Jewish diaspora all over the world have been singing to their kids every year, next year in Jerusalem. They've got an ancestral story dating back to crusading times or something, when there was a flood of Jews leaving the Middle East. They got the idea that that's their homeland, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. Sadly for those people, there is absolutely zero archaeological evidence to bolster any such a notion. It is literally a grandmother story. It's a bit like my grandmother having told me when I was 3 that one day, when the Northern Irish Protestants kicked the English and the Catholics out of Northern Ireland, then there was going to be a huge argument in her family as to who was Laird of Derry Lodge, because she grew up believing that her grandfather had been the Laird of Derry Lodge, because when he came to Australia, he established the bloody Orange Lodge in Australia. What a wanker. He wanted to import that sectarianism and crap to Australia. But that was a grandmother story that was absolutely rooted in bullshit. While the Israeli theory that they should be a Jewish state in Palestine, which is what the place was when the British got a mandate to govern the place after they kicked Napoleon out after he'd stolen it from the Egyptians, kind of sort of thing, like it's a really old story. But while they were having a war with Turkey and Germany and Hungary, the English promised that after the war, if you'll fight with us against the Ottoman Turkish and the Germans, we will let you have your own homeland here in Palestine. And they said that both to the Arabs and to the Jews, because there was a minority Jewish population in Palestine at the time, and it became, after World War I, a British protectorate. I don't know how well they protected it as a protectorate. On the one hand, you can have a bit of a look at how the British Empire administered everywhere else on the planet, where they took it upon themselves to go out and show the natives how to live their life. On the other hand, I can take the eyewitness testimony of Glenn Innes's last actual German Jewish refugee from Adolf of the Hitler variety, and her name was Ursula Munstock. Now, she was 17 and her boyfriend Rolf was 18. They might have been 16 and 17 in 1936, when Kristallnacht happened, and they were Jews living in Germany. And they looked at each other and they said, how about we piss off and we go to Palestine and get married, because Germany's going bad. It's really dead in the tubes. They'd had 3 years of living there watching Hitler get bigger and worse. And they went to Palestine, and they reckon that Palestine under the British was not much better than Germany under Hitler. And that is a big comment, but that's what they had to say. So they then got on a different boat and they come to Australia. And in 1938, they got into Australia. I think it was before the Munich crisis, because after the Munich crisis, nowhere, anywhere on earth was accepting German Jewish refugees, or even after 38, European refugees who were Jews just wanting to get the hell out of Europe. There had been a long-standing antipathy towards Jews. Some of it stirred up by the Christians, some of it stirred up by the Muslims, some of it's older than that. On the one hand, I want to leave that alone. On the other hand, there's always going to be a bunch of people who say, oh, yeah, but the Jews, blah, 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 conspiracy, 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 elders of Zion, Rothschild, the 12 people who own all the wealth in the world. There's an extensive body of conspiratorial fruit loopery concerning why a lot of people have been raised to not like Jews, or to distrust Jews, or to treat Jews badly. On the other hand, there is an orthodoxy to the effect that there is absolutely no basis at all whatsoever in any of Europe's dislike of Jewish people. And cards on the table, my father's first wife had a Jewish mother. And that means that my 3 half siblings, technically, they can go back to Israel, because Jewishness is transmitted down the female line. You've got some hopes as to who your son's children might be, but your daughter's children, you're absolutely bloody certain that they are your children, especially if you know that your daughter is your daughter. So Jewishness is transmitted down the female line. That means my brother and my sisters are technically, yeah, their mother's mother was Jewish, therefore they can go back to Israel. My mother's brother married a Jewish lady who, her mother took them to England in the 1930s, before England put the walls down, and then they came to Australia after the war. So, yeah, I'm not one of the people who is raised to be antipathetic towards Jews, although I did pick up on it a bit, not so much as a kid in Glen Innes. No Jewish jokes were being told in Glen Innes when I was in primary school. Where I picked up on anti-Semitism as being a thing that was still happening in some parts of society was when I got sent to Catholic boarding schools. If somebody wanted to borrow money when I was at a boarding school, if you said, no, I've got a bit of money, but it's my money, I'm using it for me, they go, oh, don't be such a fucking Jew. Why that? What for? How come? And then you'd get into the whole conspiracies about Jews controlling the money supply of the world. But if you go back, say, 5,000 years, back to when Hammurabi was writing the first architectural code in Babylon, saying that if you build an arch, then the architect gets to stand under the arch while the scaffolding is removed. And if you've done a shit-house job calculating the angle of the dangle of the keystone, then it'll fall down and kill him. And that's one less bullshit architect we got to worry about. One of the things Hammurabi said was every 7 years, anybody who owes you any money, you got to wipe that debt out. They haven't got to keep paying you after 7 years. That was called a Jubilee year. And sometime around then, the Jews had been goat herders who'd been captured by the Babylonians. They'd been picked up by the Babylonians and they'd been conscripted to help build the telescope. Now, the telescope in Babylon was a huge stone tower, and the idea behind Babylonian naked eye astronomy was you get a tall post, taller the better, and you get out there when the sun goes down and you can very first see the stars. And you line up where you got to stand so your eye can draw a straight line between where, I don't know, Sirius or Mars or Jupiter, wherever the star appears, and you drive a peg in the ground. And then you come back on the next clear night and you see where you got to stand in order to line it up on the next night, and you get a line of pegs that show you how that star is moving. So the bigger the telescope, the taller the post, the more accurate your Babylonian astronomy is going to be. And the Babylonians, they'd invented irrigated agriculture. They were busy sowing their seeds with salt because underground water is more salty than river water, and river water is more salty than the rain that lands on the ground. So every time they irrigated their paddocks, because they'd cut down the trees, they'd switched off the rainfall pump, they dropped the rainfall by 30 to 60%. So they had to irrigate in order to produce the feed to feed their city. Meanwhile, they were capturing slaves and they were building their telescopes, and the slaves come from all over the country, opposite sides of the Babylonian Empire. They couldn't talk to one another. And then Babylonian civilization fell on its ass because their agriculture failed and they could no longer bring enough food to feed the city, because the road to where the food would still grow was just quite so bloody long. And Babylon fell down on its ass, and all of the escaped construction slaves left, and the Jews pissed off, and they got the story of the Tower of Babel. They were trying to build a tower to heaven. No, they were building a telescope. And God got cranky. And when the tower fell down and the civilization fell, we all ran away and we couldn't talk to the other people. No, you couldn't talk to anybody but yourselves when you first got captured. And they wandered around being homeless goat herders, probably lost half their bloody culture while they were construction slaves. And then, bingo, they fell in captivity with the Egyptians again. That's, what, 3,500 years ago? But right back there when Hammurabi was writing his code talking about Jubilee years, there was a Jewish writer called Deuteronomy. And he wrote Genesis, the first chapter in the Torah, the first chapter in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible. And he said, "Thou shalt not charge interest to thy brother." God forbids usury. You can't charge or pay interest. It's wicked, it's evil, it's bad, it's horrible. And if you skip forward 1,500 years or so, 600 years after Jesus died for throwing the money lenders out of the Temple of Solomon because they made the whole temple blasphemous, because they were charging money on the loans. They were lending people money so they could buy doves and pigs and goats and shit and go into the Temple of Solomon and cut their throat in a blood sacrifice. And apparently the only reason that the Jewish people no longer practice their religion with blood sacrifice of animals is because somebody knocked the Temple of Solomon down, and that was the one place on earth where they were allowed to kill things to please their God theory. I want it to rain, create a God theory. I'll cut this bloody chook's head off. Now you'll make it rain for me, won't you? Oh, what a highly intelligent, civilized bunch of philosophers they were, and apparently still are. So anyway, nobody was allowed to charge interest. But if you go past the Torah, you get to a thing called the Talmud. And the Talmud is basically a whole bunch of people chopping logic and trying to argufy among themselves and come up with some reason why you don't have to actually pay attention to what the rule says. It's like the people who say, oh, well, that commandment, thou shalt not kill, that Moses brought down, that means you can't kill if you want to, but, like if the local debating society gets together and they vote that you go and kill the fucking janitor at the primary school because he looks like a creep and he might be a pedophile, that's okay, that's the will of the community. No, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt kill not. You can't wrap yourself in the religion. You can't say, oh, I'm killing somebody because God would say they're a bad person, so I'm doing God's work. No. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Judge not thy fellow human, lest thine own heart or soul be weighed in the balance against the feather of truth and found to be wanting. That's Jesus plagiarised the very first part of that, but the rest of it's from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, 3,000-4,000 years ago. Or as Jesus did say, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. You have to keep the 11th commandment. Basically, if you want somebody to sneak around and take pot shots at you in the middle of the night, then sit there polishing your sniper's rifle and fantasise about shooting some other prick while they're not looking. Whatever you put out there, it'll come back to you. That's karma. It's not kismet. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. It's all just random. No. Karma is not kismet, and kismet is not fate. Fate's the three little Greek witches sitting in a cave on Mount Olympus, and one of them's got a spinning wheel, and one of them's got a ruler, and the other one has got a pair of scissors, and they've only got one eyeball between the 6 sockets, and they share the eyeball. And one of them is going to measure the thread of your life, while the other one spins it, and the third one cuts it off when you've been living too long. Karma, kismet, fate, God's will. There's all these ideas that people have as to how to guide themselves and what they can get away with. But if you've got a God theory that says thou shalt not kill, and you know that to piss your God theory off, all you've got to do is break any one of these laws and consistently do it. And if you reckon your God theory is a powerful God theory, then you wouldn't need a gun, would you? If the Pope in Rome believed in his God theory, would the Pope need an armed guard to sleep behind, or would God keep the wicked bastards away? Do I have a gun to shoot the snakes? I don't. I can rely on my God theory to get the local bird population to come and tell me about the snake. And if it's a dangerous snake, a different bird specialised for fighting that snake, he'll show up and he'll chase the bloody thing away. Because my God theory is not powerless. I don't need a death machine. Well, that's not how the Israelis think, you see. So at the end of World War II, when Hitler had spent 6 years out of the 12 years that his 1,000-year Reich actually lasted, he spent 6 years doing everything he could to kill every Jew in Europe. Bearing in mind that he'd tried to export the Jews in the 1930s. He wanted to send them to Madagascar or Mauritius. No, you can't do that. The colonial authorities wouldn't sell him an island. In 1945, maybe 46, there was a bunch of nutters in Australia who wanted to turn the northwest corner of Tasmania into a Jewish state. Bring them all out there and maroon them on the bloody coldest, windiest part of Australia where nobody lived. And that was supposed to be going to help them, because the people who wanted to do that recognised that if you put all the Jews in Europe in the middle of the Middle East on Palestinian land, it'll be a shit fight that'll never go away, and they'll eventually fight with all of their neighbours, and their neighbours will gather together and do what they can to exterminate them. Bring them out here where nobody lives. And that was the idea in 1946. But no. The United Nations, which was formed by the Great British Empire, the United Soviet Socialist Republics, and the United States, and what was left of the French Empire and the Dutch Empire, maybe even the Belgian Empire, they all got together and formed a grand alliance to kill fascists. They wanted to kill Hitler, they wanted to kill Tojo, they wanted to kill all of their supporters. They got to the end of it, and they found that actually they had a pretty sizable guilt trip. They had a sizable guilt trip about not having helped anybody run away from Hitler's Holocaust against the Jews. So they just decided, apropos of never asking the Palestinians what they thought, how about we get all of the Jews that Hitler missed and we fucking pay them to go and live in Palestine? Because they won't want to live here. They're not going to trust us. They know that us Europeans, we can fucking turn on a dime and suddenly get really bloody nasty to them just because they're Jews. And that's what happened. The UN said, look, Palestine is going to become a two-party nation where there's going to be Jews living in some areas and Palestinians living in other areas. And the Jews said, yay, we proclaim Israel. And the Palestinians said, hang on. This is a catastrophe. This is a disaster. You're ethnically cleansing us out of our homes that we've been in for hundreds or thousands of years. And the Jews said, Israel, Zionism, Zionism, boo-hoo, Hitler was an arsehole. Look what he did to us in Europe. And all the Europeans said, yeah, we'll donate. Go to Israel, go to Israel. You can go to Israel all over the world. You go to Israel. I was born in 1961, and by 1961, Europe was looking pretty much like Hitler wanted it to look. You could walk around all day and not see a Jew anywhere. Who ethnically cleansed Europe? Was it Hitler or was it the bloody Europeans who beat Hitler? Anyway, they put them in Palestine. And since then, the Jews in Palestine have systematically overrun and ignored every land boundary the United Nations set for them. Oh, but there's so many of us. Oh, we want to expand. Oh, I should be allowed to build a block of flats. And here's the funny thing. 76 years ago, only last week, a bunch of proud, patriotic Polish partisans finally were wiped out by the German SS after a brave, hopeless uprising against the SS concentration camp guards who'd had them surrounded and were genocidally exterminating them and had been doing so for 4 or 5 years. And the Israelis think that those partisans who rose up and tried to kill the concentration camp guards were a bunch of heroes, because that was the Warsaw Ghetto. And the Polish partisans in there had some Jews among them. A lot of Jews among them, actually. But when you put Jews in a concentration camp for 4 or 5 years and they decide to launch a absolutely hopelessly doomed suicidal uprising against a concentration camp guard, you ask anybody in Tel Aviv and they're going to say they're fucking heroes. Yet when the Israelis put 2.6 million Palestinians in a 7-mile by 12-mile concentration camp and leave them there penned up for 16 years, all of a sudden everybody's supposed to feel shocked and horrified and outraged and surprised that the inmates of Israel's apartheid concentration camp decided that they would rather fly a fucking machine gun equipped paramotor, and they were paramotors. They were not paragliders. A paraglider has no engine. God almighty, I hate the fucking media of the world for the way they misspeak about aviation. A paramotor is a ram air parachute designed for powered flight. They can be single-seaters with a motor and a backpack, but the ones we see all the pictures of, they were 2-seat trikes. Similar to the ones you can put a hang glider wing on, but designed for parachutes. Now, do you imagine, or can you imagine, how hopeless, despairing a population would have to be before the cleverest thing that anybody wants to do is fly a bloody paramotor with a machine gun over the border and attack a police station or an army guard's outpost? And they somehow managed to cobble together enough skyrockets to launch them in waves of 5,000 or 7,000 per day, and we're 3 days into it and they're still launching skyrockets. Somebody built a bloody lot of skyrockets. And the Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, the hooper-duper super secret squirrels, you know, the people who didn't give a flying fuck about anybody else's national laws or criminal code, they wanted to go out to bloody Argentina and grab somebody because, oh, you know, like there's all these people want to take you to task and put you on trial for being a bastard in the concentration camps. Who gives a fuck what anybody else's laws are? It was what the Jews did in Argentina, or Chile, or wherever it was, kidnapping people and taking them back to Israel to try them. That put Ronald Reagan onto the idea that when, I think it was the PLO again, hijacked a boat called the Aquililaro, and they went through and they looked for anybody who had an Israeli passport and they threw them over the bloody side. And one of them was an American Israeli fella in a wheelchair. So Ronnie Reagan decided that, okay, American justice can reach into anybody's country, anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your laws are. It doesn't matter what evidence we don't show anyone. If if the American government thinks that anybody anywhere in the world has harmed an American or has harmed American interests, and if that nation's government fails to cooperate with Uncle Spam in Washington, they have no problem at all whatsoever with dispatching jet fighters to hijack airliners and make them divert to a NATO country which is suitably under the thumb, and then arresting the people that they want to get even with. There has been no international law since Ronald Reagan, and he was inspired by the bloody Israelis and the way Mossad went around the world killing people. They did it after the 1972 Munich Olympics thing too. Israel doesn't give a flying fuck about anybody else in the world because their religion teaches them they are God's chosen race. So whatever they want to do in Tel Aviv, the God theory of Judaism sitting in heaven will tick off on it. It's okay because we're God's chosen race. We can do whatever we want to do. Want to put 2.6 million people in a concentration camp? That's okay. I don't see it that way. I think if you expect a God theory to work for you every day in real life, in real time, you have to obey all its tenets. I was an insurance salesman once upon a time, and they taught us that in the dim and distant past, people believed if they practiced their God theory, then bad things wouldn't happen to them. But today we have science, and we look around and we see pious, devout people going to church every day, singing their psalms, ringing their bells, burning their incense, talking to their God theory, and yet lightning hits the bloody church roof and blows it out of the ground because bad things happen to good people. It's all random. That's why you got to sell them an insurance policy to cover the roof of their church. Later on, it transpired the priest was fucking the choir boy, and the church also had a bloody insurance policy to pay the legal fees and the damages owed to the family of the choir boy after he suicided after the priest had fucked him. So maybe the God theory wasn't actually wrong in hitting the bloody roof of the church with a lightning strike to blow the place out of the ground because it was such a hypocritical den of iniquity. So what's your God theory going to do when you got a bunch of Jews in one camp and a bunch of Christians in another camp and a bunch of Muslims in another camp, and all of them say that they are religions of the book? They're all Abrahamic religions. They all obey Moses' commandments. They all obey the commandment against killing. And one mob of them kills the other mob consistently for 70 bloody years, all because a different person in a different country was nasty to people who are all already dead for 12 years, and the 12 years of being nasty to the Jews ended in Germany in 1945 when Adolf shit himself as he shot himself. He started being an arsehole when he got elected in 1933, like a powerful arsehole who was in a position of authority where he could make people's lives miserable because Jews were better artists than he was when he was a student in Vienna and he didn't get into art school because of them, or some bloody reason. Oh, that's right, yeah. Yeah, Hitler's father was a bloody Jewish bastard. A Jewish bastard of a rich Frenchman. So there was an overcompensated self-hatred type inferiority complex going on there, projected out at all the other Jews in the world because Hitler's grandfather, the rich Jew, had disowned Hitler's father, the bastard. Anyway, here we go. Now in Australia, by reflex, because Australia helped set up the United Nations, and Australia was one of the early signatories to the idea of, take all of Europe's Jews and ship them to fucking Palestine. Don't bring them to Australia. We don't fucking want them here. That was the undertone. Not allowed to say that, but that was the undertone. It came across quite well in the 1960s, I thought. And the way our laws are written, it's really weird. If you grow up in Australia and your parents raised you to want to go over to the Middle East and fight in their fucking wars over there, it's absolutely okay if you go and join the Israeli army. That's not a problem. You can go and join the Israeli army and you can romp around the Gaza Strip killing fucking Palestinians as much as you like, and then you can come back to Australia and you can go back to university after having done your term in the army. Yet if you go over there and you decide you want to, I don't know, go to Iran, oh no, you're not allowed to do that. You want to join ISIS? You can't do that either. No, 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 you're only allowed to fight on one side. You can't go and be a medic helping the Kurds when the Kurds were fucking American allies against the Syrians. Oh, no, 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 no. No, you got to let Australian government tell you who you're allowed to go and shoot for the glory and honour of your national pride. The way I see it, everybody who pays taxes to support the Israeli army is a legitimate target for everybody in Gaza. And everybody in Gaza who pays taxes or donates money to buy the weapons that the Gazans, Palestinians, are using against the citizens of Israel, they are a legitimate target. You know why my father's cousin cooked 43,000 hamburgers in July in one night? He killed 43,000 hamburgers because those fucking idiot hamburgers supported, cheered for, voted and obeyed a bloke called Adolf Hitler. That's why he killed them. Why did the Palestinians come out in their fucking machine gun equipped paramotors and hit a bloody rock concert and killed 260 Israeli citizen taxpayers who had been working in the economy and paying taxes to fund the weapons which were being used to keep the Palestinians in Gaza in a concentration camp? It's really fucking simple. If you don't want to be a target for somebody else, then do not pay your army to go and fucking kill their grandmother. Don't pay your army or your air force to go and blow their house down. Don't pay your army to go and lock them up for your fucking convenience and peace of mind because you don't like thinking about the difficult shit which surrounds your very existence because of what your ancestors did to do to make sure that you can live the life of fucking luxury. Apart from the Uyghurs in China, the Palestinians are treated worse than any indigenous people anywhere on earth except the Australian Aborigines. And if you can believe the polls, this weekend Australia is going to shit all over the Aborigines by once again denying them constitutional recognition and refusing to let them have a voice to Parliament. Because they are a tiny, weeny little minority and we stole this land by gunpoint. We killed 60,000 of them. As many Aborigines died defending against the Sheep and Potato Brigade as Australians died in the First World War. And, oh, you're not allowed to forget about Anzac Day, but they've got to fucking get over the sheep wars. All I can say is I've been trying to institute Aboriginal fire management practices in the face of global warming. God fucking help us white Australians after the pricks like Peter Dutton convince the dickheads in the suburbs and the assholes who've been fucking shipped to Australia in my lifetime. I can remember when there was 11 million Australians. Now there's 28 million of them. I can remember when maybe 50 or 60% of the people living in Australia had at least two grandparents who'd been born in Australia. Now you're pushing shit uphill to get 10 or 20% who've got two grandparents born in Australia. When I was a kid, the biggest Greek population in the city outside of Greece was Melbourne. There were more Greeks in Melbourne than there were in any other city anywhere in the world. Here where I'm sitting in 1832, there were 1,200 Aborigines in the whole of the New England tablelands. There were no sheep and there were no white men. In 1842, there were 600 Aborigines, half of them had been killed off. There were 1,200 white people, as many as there used to be Aborigines, and there were 100,000 sheep. And the free-range Aborigines were no more. They'd been run off the land. Well, that's exactly what the Palestinians have had to put up with ever since the United Nations decided to finish Hitler's plan of ethnically cleansing Europe of most Jews. And that is my view as a kangaroo feeder, sitting here watching the Israelis demand that everybody feel sorry for them because after 16 years of treating 2.6 million people as shit because the Jews wanted to steal their land, all of a sudden the inmates of the concentration camp have decided they would rather fucking die. And if they can go out there and kill some of the arseholes who've been funding the concentration camp guards who've been tormenting and making them miserable, they'll do that too. And because Benjamin Netanyahu alienated and pissed off most of the higher echelons of the military, everybody in the Israeli Defence Force who understands how parliamentary law and the separation of powers and democracy works, they've been protesting that fucking idiot and working to rule and doing a go slow and talking more about fucking politics and what's wrong with Israel and why it's not a democracy than they've been looking out for where did the fucking 10, 15,000 drones that have been launched in the last 3 days come from. Oh shit, no. Israel's had the idea that by doing what they were doing, locking everybody up in Gaza and stealing the occupied territories for their settlers, that was mowing the grass. You know, like every now and then you figure out where there's some people who are talking about having a revolution or a rebellion and you just bomb their house. You know, you're going with bulldozers and knock their fucking grandparents' house down. You know, peace through superior firepower. When you got them by the balls, their hearts and minds are bound to follow, and America will keep selling fucking weapons to Israel because, you know, America's on the same fucking guilt trip that Europe was on at the end of the Second World War. America didn't want any fucking European Jews going there in the 1930s. Too many Americans already had plenty of experience borrowing money from a Jew and having to pay interest and having to make 11 harvests in 10 years and never give the land any fallow time. And at the end of the 10 years, the land's turned into a desert. And when there's a drought on, they default on the payments and they lose the fucking land. And then they die in debt. Their children inherit the debt and the children go and borrow more money to get more land because the stuff their parents worked on has been flogged to death. And the money lender who charges interest to the parent and then goes in there and forecloses on the defaulted mortgage, they leave it for 2 or 3 years and it gets overgrown with weeds and they wait for some other silly dickhead to turn up trying to have a tree change and they sell that to them as a virgin bush block and they lend them the money to buy it. Yeah. So the American capitalist businessmen, they know that there are people who've been stacking up money for generations and centuries by charging interest to people who don't believe in charging interest, but they want to borrow the money. So the Christians and the Muslims, if they really got in a pinch, they'd go and borrow money from the Jews. And that has, I suspect, I have no hard evidence to tie that together, but I think that's why so many places where a Jewish diaspora has run away from being persecuted and everybody's felt sorry for them, oh, come here with open arms. Between 50 and 200 years later, they get hunted out of there too. Now, it's not the rest of the world. If everybody's marching in step and your kid's the only one who's cack-footed, it's not the rest of the world who's marching out of step. It's your fucking kid. The simple fact that wherever the Jews go in the world, they manage to generate a huge amount of animosity among the people who live around them, who welcomed them with open arms only decades or generations earlier. It's got to say something about something, and I think that's what it is. I think it's the prohibition against usury because God said no. And the Jews have been practicing a loophole to get around what God told Deuteronomy, and they've been doing that for about 3,500 years. I don't believe it was the Jews who invented the death cult of harvest everythingism. That was the Turkeys at Göbekli Tepe, and that was 12,300 years ago. It took them 700 years to turn Göbekli Tepe into a desert which had been abandoned, and the city had been abandoned twice. So that takes us to about 11,000 years ago. There was a diaspora from Göbekli Tepe, and they took the idea of harvest everythingism out as far as people could walk in 5,000 years. And at the end of that time, that's when in Ukraine, the Yamnayans appeared, a tribe of tall, warlike horse milk drinkers. And their modus operandi was the youngsters set off on the horses and they captured the neighbouring tribe's pasture for the horses. They killed all the men to stop them from objecting, and they married or they enslaved all the women, and then they forced the women to teach them how the local landscape and ecology works, and then they stayed there and raised their kids, by which time the pasture was fucked and they sent them on. And it took the Yamnayans a mere 1,000 years to move from Ukraine and conquer everything to the Spanish Atlantic coast, everything to the Siberian Pacific coast, all the way down to the bottom of India, all the way up to the top of Norway. They didn't get below the Sahara. They didn't get to Australia. They didn't get to Indonesia. And they didn't get to the Americas. And then the broadacre death cult of harvest everythingism took off and spread. And by the time of Babylon, there was people raising cities, and they had armies of thousands of people all wearing, more or less the same sort of armour and with more or less the same sort of weapons. Somebody was feeding them all. They'd cut down all of the native food forest in order to specialise in a monoculture. And the more they produced, the more they destroyed, and the less sustainable it was, and their civilisations rose and fell like fucking plague locusts. And the Jews and the Palestinians are still living there on the edge of the bloody Mediterranean, where their ancestors have spent, conservatively speaking, 6,000 years destroying the fucking ecology and sending expeditions out to steal everybody else's resources. You know why you can't go and look at a dodo in a zoo? Because the last one was eaten 400 years ago by a Dutchman, a mercenary pirate, armed and with malice aforethought, on his way to Indonesia to steal the 4 islands on which nutmeg was grown, so that the fucking Dutchman, the Dutch mercenary pirate, could corner the world's market on nutmeg and feed the European markets. Nothing that Europe or the Yamnayans have ever done to the world was ever done for the benefit of the people they attacked, invaded, conquered, and colonized. A colon is a long muscular tube with a mucous membrane lining, and it's filled full of shit. And when a colonist from Europe gets to Australia or Israel or fucking anywhere else in the world, they look around and they empty their colon all over everything they fail to understand. Israel doesn't understand the Palestinians. Israel doesn't want to understand the Palestinians. Israel wants the Palestinians dead. Israel is behaving like every other conquered race. As soon as the fucking conquerors collapse, the conquered race jumps up and adopts all the very fucking worst features of their conquerors. When the Roman Empire fell, everywhere that had been conquered by the Romans began writing "he leaves" in Latin over the doorways of every fucking government building. You can go to any government building in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, America, all over Europe, and over the doorway, when you look at it from the inside, it says "he leaves" in Latin. Exit. Well, the Jews suffered 12 years of being treated badly and 6 years of being treated absolutely fucking murderously by the Nazis. They come out from under and they immediately, the Zionists became Zio-Nazis, and that means they need somebody to fill their fucking concentration camps, and that's what they use the Palestinians for. I predict that it's just going to get worse. There are not going to be any winners. What will happen is everybody will get involved. It's going to become a fucking free-for-all. There's going to be random fucking unplanned acts of violence all over the fucking place. It'll destabilise markets. It'll probably switch off the oil flow through the Middle East. And you know what? Speaking as a greenie, good. Whatever fucking takes out the industrial economy of the world, good. What I'm doing here, I'm playing the most artistic game of Titanic deck chairs I can while 8 billion fucking idiots are trying to kill the bloody ecology that I depend on. I have absolutely no expectation that all of the people in Israel and all the people in Palestine are going to wake up tomorrow and say, oh, fuck, why don't we become pacifists and vegetarians and work together to fix the mess our ancestors have left for us? They're not going to do that. They're going to pat their fucking gun. They're going to polish their fucking ammunition. They're going to sharpen their knife, and they're going to fantasize about how they're going to kill everybody else, and they're going to get all the resources for themselves. A pox and a plague on all their fucking houses. The whole fucking lot of them deserve each other. What's happening for the industrial civilization is their fucking chickens are flying home to roost, and they've grown up to become the size of cassowaries and emus, and they look like they're fixing to kick the whole foul house down around the ears of the bastards who borrowed money at usurious rates to build the fucking shit house. There you go. Now you know. And I think I'm going to call this Hypocrisy regarding Israel. And we'll see how the bloody algae rhythm goes with that one. Won't we? Hey? Was that a good story? Did it make sense to you too? Hey? Was that good? Funny thing. Hilarious thing, actually, but there's not one fucking individual human being in all of Palestine or all of Israel who is as fair-minded and as reasonable and as rational as this swamp wallaby. This swamp wallaby is absolutely 100% certain that even if some other bastard of a human shot at it yesterday or run close to it in a car, it doesn't have to come up here and kick me in the head and punish me, because I'm not the person who ran close to it in a car or tried to shoot at it. That's not me. You see this door? You see these scratches up here? They were put there by a kangaroo whose name was Rowan of Rin. And Rowan of Rin used to come up here and he'd stand on the veranda and he'd scratch at the door, and I'd open the door and he'd bow down and cover his balls with his claws. And he sat down to cover his balls with his claws one morning at 6 o'clock. And I'd heard gunfire in the paddock out there the night before, and I'd woken up thinking, Jesus, I hope nobody's killing me friends. I hope that's a pig or something. And when I opened the door to Rowan of Rin, he had a 30 caliber bleeding half moon bite out of one of his ears on the front bleeding edge. And he'd been almost missed by a murderous human with a death machine, a ballistic death machine. And when he come here in the morning, he didn't want to fucking put a kangaroo-sized hole in me. He didn't give me a colostomy with his toenail, because he knew that I was not the particular individual arsehole who'd tried to kill him the night before. I dare you, I dare each and every one of the 8 billion of you to go and fucking convince one Israeli to put their fucking gun down and leave the Palestinians alone because they had really good reason to do what they did. I dare you to go and try and convince one Palestinian to put their gun down and stop trying to kill random Israelis. Because by their lights, according to what they've been raised to believe, what they've been taught by their fucking schools, by their parents, by their history, by their neighbours, by their teachers, by their newspapers, by their magazines, by the TV and radio, by their lights, the Israelis are 100% correct. God's on their side. Ask any rabbi. Talk to the Palestinians. Allah Akbar. God's on their side too. Talk to any fucking imam. And all of them are not as bright as a swamp wallaby or a kangaroo because they go in for collective judgment and collective punishment. One Israeli upsets one Palestinian, that Palestinian's family wants to go and kill every fucking Israeli. One Palestinian goes and fucking lands his motorised paraglider with his machine gun and shoots up a fucking rock concert. All of a sudden, every Israeli wants to kill every Palestinian. There's not fucking one person in that whole country of a place who's as bright as this swamp wallaby here. This swamp wallaby has got a better grip on jurisprudence than every fucking individual human being in Israel and Palestine, Great Britain, United States, France, Germany, Holland, Belgium, Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Romania, Slovenia, Slovakia. The reason I live on an endangered species sanctuary is because humanity's fucking mad, bad, and dangerous to be around. Fucking dangerous to be around. Give me the shits. It's enough to give diarrhea the shits. Just sharing the planet with them. I remember when there was 3 billion of them. 1961, 319 parts per million CO2. There's now fucking 423. I can smell each one of the 8 billion of the bastards by the carbon that they've farted during their lifetime. And I'm nearly as bad, you know, like 1998. That's when this bad weather was created by the carbon that we released before 1998, because it takes 25 years for a cube of carbon to do 95% of the global warming it's going to achieve. And you know what? There is no point anybody fighting over the fucking desert of Israel, because in the Greenland Ice Cap, sitting on a fucking mountain, there's enough ice that when it slides off and goes plop, sea level's going to come up 6 metres. The only thing holding it there is the shelf of floating sea ice, acting like a tampon to stop the blood flowing out. The sea ice stops the ice from flowing down the glacier. The glacier itself, the 3 kilometres thick ice cap, it's been getting rained on by warm water in hurricanes 2 summers in a row. The warm water going down through Swiss cheesy holes in the ice, lubricating the bottom of it, it's ready to slide. Meanwhile, West Antarctica, the Doomsday Glacier, it's also got enough ice to raise sea level 6 metres in one go. It's also being held back by the melting, shrinking, retreating, floating sea ice. And the other thing that's holding it back is a ridge of rock that the glacier is grounding on before it joins the sea ice. And on the inland side of that ridge, there's a fucking volcano going off underwater on the ocean bed. And it is pumping heat into the ice that's currently resting on the rock. The concerted opinion of all of the boffins who've been studying this shit was that before the first hurricane rained on Greenland, this wasn't going to be a problem till 2035. After it started raining warm water on Greenland 2 years ago, they decided 2025 to 2027. And here's the real sting in the tail. Whichever ice sheet goes and lets the glacier flow first, sea level rises 6 metres. That means the ice sheet that's currently grounding the other one, West Antarctica or Greenland, it's going to get the edge lifted up by the rise in sea level, and that will break the tongue off and it'll fly off. So whichever one goes first, the other one's probably going to go within a week, because it'll take a week for the sea level to rise, and then crack, plop, crack, plop. So have a look at Israel and just draw a new sea line along the 12-metre contour. It doesn't fucking matter who wins between Israel and Gaza. It is supremely irrelevant. Have a look at the 12-metre contour in Qatar. Have a look at the 12-metre contour at Saudi Arabia. Have a look at the 12-metre contour in the United Arab Emirates. Have a look at the 12-metre contour in every fucking oil exporting terminal and refinery on the planet. They're all at sea level. when it goes off, and it doesn't matter whether Putin nukes NATO or Israel nukes all of the surrounding Arab countries, when it goes off, industrial civilization's over, because you can't fucking rebuild if there's no shop to go and buy a new hammer and nail. Where do you think the Ukrainians are going to be able to buy the materials to rebuild Ukraine? Where do you think the Israelis and the Palestinians are going to buy the materials to rebuild when there's no international supply and logistical chain, and there's no fossil fuel, and there's no grid power? And they certainly haven't got a remaining remnant of a pre-industrial lifestyle type ecology that they can fall back on. And if you can find a man and a woman of childbearing age in all of Israel who has such a good vegetable garden fed by water that's got tanks and dams that are gravity filled by rainwater, they've got a vegetable garden that's rainwater fed, they don't need any technology for it, and they've got such a big vegetable garden that at the end of the year they're going to be alive eating their own food, and they've still got a vegetable garden for next year. Now, can they walk to one another to fucking have a kid? Or do they just live to the end of their life, and after they die there's nobody to water the garden? We literally sit at the edge of a fucking precipice, and anybody who doesn't get it should really go and have a look at Mad Max 1 and Mad Max 2, and then remember, that wasn't science fiction, that was fucking social documentary. That was sociology. That was prognostication. That was extrapolation. And we're pretty much in a case of pass the porridge because I've got no teeth and I can't eat popcorn. It's fucking really interesting to watch it go on from half a world away. There's nothing I can do or say is going to change any of it. They're going to act like self-centered, hypocritical, lying, murderous, avaricious, blasphemous turds, because that's what they were raised to do. It's what they want to do. All they're trying to do is get ahead. They don't want to cooperate. They don't want to work together. You ask any Israeli, why do you fight? Oh, I fight because I love my family. I defend my family. Ask any Palestinian, why do you fight? I fight because I love my family. I defend my family. I love my country. Ask any Israeli, why do the Palestinians fight? They fight because they fucking hate us and want to exterminate us. Ask any Palestinian, why do the Israelis fight? They fight because they fucking hate us and want to exterminate us. Humanity's fucking pathetic, you know that? Really, truly pathetic. Yes, they are. They give me the shits. Truly. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.